we're going to start our meeting. Again, let me go. I didn't ring the bell. Let's get us back to. There we go. Okay. The meeting is officially started. Hello, everyone. Tonight is obviously a big night. Before we start with Dave, I want to go through just a couple of announcements. Click on this so it doesn't rotate. Stay there. We will get this all set. A few announcements about upcoming meetings. September 16th, next week, our photojournalism night. Bring up to 5 images. That's digital. The submission date is usually 48 hours before. That's on our calendar. That's not an actual competition, but all images entering photojournalism are eligible for the end of the year awards. After that, September 23rd, another print competition in Nature. And at that print competition, Eric Wethington is going to be speaking again from Dodds about the other stuff, tripods, color balance, etc. There'll be more stuff raffled, and he'll be speaking before the Nature competition. September 30th, Zoom presentation, Stan and Shirley Berman, exploring France and Italy. They took a photographic journey through there and are going to be bringing that all to us. That'll be a Zoom meeting. We will send out the links to all members. And then October 7th is our first bee competition, which will be a print competition for our beginning students. We encourage all beginning students to try their hand and enter in the bee competition. There is no malignant judging. This is all benign. Everyone is nice. It's a good way to get started for the big stuff. The Rob Eric Celebration of Life, Sunday, September 25th, 2 p.m. That's here in the clubhouse. All those who knew Rob, we encourage you to attend. We'll be going through a lot of old slides and pictures, remembrances of Rob. And anyone who has any candidates, old pictures, old remembrances, anecdotes, please send them just to us at info@clevelandphoto.org, and I'd be glad to use them in the presentation for that day. Also, that day is what we're going to do is Rob had a tremendous amount of camera equipment. Camera bodies, lenses, tripods, lighting equipment, accessories, the works. And really the family doesn't know what to do with it. And we have taken it all and we are just going to be selling it off. We're selling this at basically half price to a quarter price. The deals are just amazing because we don't want the best price. We just want to get rid of the stuff because we have nothing to do with it. And all the proceeds will go to the family. So we're essentially selling off the equipment, Rob's equipment, and giving the proceeds to the family. It'll be cash only, all equipment as is. And probably at the beginning of October, I'll be putting this out on the calendar, on the website. It'll be publicized more, and I'll put a list of the equipment and prices as well. So that'll be 2 days on a Saturday and Sunday at the end of October.
At the clubhouse?
Excuse me?
Will it be here?
Yes, it'll be here in the clubhouse. Upcoming exhibits. Westlake Porter Public Library is having an exhibit that'll be about 30 to 40 prints. The exhibits the entries are open now. The link is on the competition page of the website, and the theme is outdoors, which is good, as opposed to our last one, which was a more narrow theme. This one is basically, as I said last week, anything that's not indoors. And if you have something nice that's indoors, move it outdoors as well. But you could submit those images. They will be then judged, one selected, and that will be for the exhibit at Westlake Porter Library coming up in December. Field Trip Photo Gallery, the air show link is now up. I encourage people, I would really love to see, I'm going to put mine up there, with it getting drenched out there, with the weather what it was. I am dying to see what other people got, so I encourage anyone, put up anything you got before your camera got soaked up on the site there. On the gallery page, you'll see an upload link, and we'd love to see those. And field trip candidates are needed. I took several of our other SOAP members that day, and any pictures you have of other members, send them to DRD editor, darkroom door editor at clevelandphoto.org, so that we could use them in an upcoming article. The fall school enrollment is still underway. Fundamentals is actually in progress. Intro to Photoshop photo editing and Lightroom Classic are open for enrollment. Will be starting soon. And again, this year, Pixel Connection is offering a $50 gift certificate they will be giving to all new enrollees in the fall courses. CPS name tags. We are going to be making new name tags for members that will have your name and the date joined, rather than the old red ones for 5 and 10 years. There'll be no charge for name tags, but they will be by request only, since the vast majority of people never pick up their name tags. The sign-up sheet is always in the back of the clubhouse here. It's on the table, and all events at CPS, the sheet will be there, so you could sign up for a name tag. The logo wear is, again, we have what we have in stock. We have not ordered some in quite a while, but we have a large selection left. Anything that you see that you like, the prices are on it. It's a good deal. Spread the word on CPS, and it helps raise funds for the organization. And same thing with business cards. Business cards, I always keep, there's a whole bunch in the back of the room here as well. Grab some, keep some with you. People are always asking about the organization. You can just hand them a little card. It has our website and our email on that. So if you have someone who expresses an interest in either the club or the school or whatnot, just give them a card. They're right in the back there. And the members' lending library, all of the books are out in the hall there, you see on that shelf. If you want to borrow any of them, please just take them, just sign it out. There's a little sheet next to it. Bring it back whenever you're done. We have tons of magazines in the back of the room here from all kinds of publications. Those you don't have to sign out. If you see something you like, just take the magazine home. When you're done, just bring it back and stick it in the pile. And this, like all of our public meetings, are on our YouTube channel, so that you could watch any time. So we encourage you. All of our Friday meetings are also up on our YouTube channel. So that brings us to the end of announcements. So without any further discussion at all, we will move the camera over to Dave Busch. I will turn up the lights, and now, here's Dave.
Where did you all come from? Well, welcome to my infomercial. Got a presentation for you. I hope.
Dave, is your mic on?
Oh,
Doesn't sound like
all
it.
right. All right, it's probably worse. If you've been a member for the Cleveland Photographic Society, I'd like to point out that it's a society and not a club. Society is much classier. You know that there are always lots of presentations, as well as field trips, and the presentations cover all sorts of broad photographic, categories and techniques. A few years ago, I noticed that one thing that we didn't do was have something dedicated to specific camera models. Most everything you see here will apply to every camera that you've got. But I thought it would be a good idea to get together and people who are using the same camera models to get together once a month and talk about problems. Usually find that what happens is the Sony people and the Canon people and the Nikon people would get together and say, how do you do back button focus? So they can share that. So we started the special interest groups where we would come together once a month. It was the first Thursday of every month, and we'd like to start it up again. What we'll do is the month before we'll talk about what do you want to talk about next month, and people will say, well, we want to talk about this, shooting. One year we talked about how to shoot the air show, and so forth. And then I'll give a brief presentation the following month, and then we break up into individual groups, and everybody exchanges ideas. I'd like to get as many people come as possible because everybody in this room knows something that nobody else knows. So it's not just coming here once a month and I talk at you. It's we come here and we discuss the topic, and then you ask me questions. If somebody has something to say about it, they can answer, and by the end of the night, everybody knows a little bit more about the topic of the evening. Did this one on a Friday because we wanted to get as many people exposed to what the special interest groups do. And we have the presentation start ready to go. Oh yeah. reflection of what the mirror shows. With a mirrorless camera, you do away with all that. You've got a shutter, although they don't necessarily have to have a shutter. Nikon Z9 doesn't even have a physical shutter. You got the sensor. You use the sensor to provide a live view through the viewfinder or on an LCD on the back, and it also can be used for focus and for exposure, all in one thing. So right away, with a mirrorless camera, you've got a much simpler design, it's a lot smaller, and there's a lot of things that I'm going to show you that you can do that you couldn't do with cameras, DSLRs. And why isn't it open? There we go. The first mirrorless cameras came out in 2004, and then in 2008, a lot of them were just entry-level cameras or sometimes more advanced. But then they came out with the mirrorless like Nikon, Sony, and Canon. Eventually, Sony started first with the professional ones. I found that when the mirrorless cameras first came out, the reason people bought them, primarily people 50 years, men 50 years and older, who got them because they were smaller. I know when I got mine, I carry around a basic DSLR kit. I have a Nikon D4S, a 24 to 70, a 70 to 200, and a 16 to 35, and I was carrying 25 pounds around with me. Got my mirrorless camera, same three lenses, the equivalent same three lenses, and I was down to 12, 15 pounds. So that was really an impetus when they first started out. Here at the club, all you older people will remember, you were the first ones to start getting these things. But as they developed and became more sophisticated, the size and weight actually became secondary until here we go. The point today, there we go. The point today is you've got the Nikon Z9, which is in no way that much smaller than the DSLR equivalent, and it does a lot more. They call, like the Nikon Z9 and the others, full frame cameras, but people that own medium format cameras say, well, we have the full frame, you have crop sensors. This shows a comparison between the what we call full frame in blue, and these are the Fuji and Hasselblad and Phase 1 medium format cameras with much larger sensors. I'll get into those more a little bit later. The APS-C, like the smaller Fujis and other sensors are even smaller yet. Here's a comparison of the different mirrorless sensor sizes. Now the thing, the technology of how they work and what they do is not as important as what you can do with them. And so I want to go into what you can do with the mirrorless cameras that you couldn't do with DSLRs. One of the most important innovations has been the in-body image stabilization. It was started by Olympus and Panasonic early in the mirrorless revolution, so to speak. But now everybody's got it. And what the in-body does is it allows you to work with moving the sensor up and down, sideways, and even rotating it a little bit to compensate for camera movement. In the lens does the best job of doing pitch and yaw, and not so good with these because it's like a lever. The longer and bigger it is, the more each movement is magnified. So with the in-body combining with whatever's built into the lens, you've got superior image stabilization. Some cameras, Canon for example, can provide up to 8 f-stops of stabilization, so you could shoot, instead of having to shoot at 5/100th of a second, you could shoot way down in the quarter, half a second, that sort of thing, and get the same amount of camera anti-shake. Now, it doesn't help when the subject's moving, but if you're like me and you don't hold the camera exceptionally steady, it really helps. Second innovation is you have a lot more information available in your viewfinder. If you remember your DSLRs, they would usually have a little strip along the bottom and maybe a few icons in the viewfinder area with information. With mirrorless cameras, they actually carry it to the extreme. You don't really need all of these things at once, and they let you customize them so you can choose only which things are important to you. If you need to know, you'll need to know what your battery life is and what autofocus mode you're using, things like that. Your flash status, you just have those and leave the others off. So you now have a lot more information in the viewfinder to work with. Here's something you couldn't do before. With a DSLR and you take a picture and you want to review and see if your exposure is correct, the worst thing to do is to look at the image on the screen because the screen isn't really accurate in terms of telling you what the exposure is. It'll give you sort of a rendition, but you shouldn't use it to judge whether or not, how much to change your exposure. You can take a picture and then look at it after you've taken it and look at the histogram, which is a lot more useful in determining exactly where your tones are. But with a DSLR, you don't have access to a histogram until after you've taken the picture. With a mirrorless camera, you can have a histogram on the screen while you shoot, and you can adjust it and see in real time what your change in exposure does. Not only it'll be reflected in how light or how dark the image is on the screen, but you can see the accurate histogram representation and know that while you're losing some dark tones and you've got a lot of space over here at the light side of the histogram, you could maybe add a little exposure and get more tones in your picture. But with DSLRs, if your camera was tilted a little bit, you get this wonderful indicator in the one corner, which would tell you that your camera is tilted 1 degree or it's tilted 2 degrees or more, which is not all that useful until you could actually just rotate the camera until it says level. That's okay, but it didn't provide you enough feedback. With a mirrorless camera, they can display this right on the screen, and it works in 2 directions. The SLR will tell you if the camera's rotated. This shows you, with this scale, how much it's rotated, and in this one, how much it's tilted forward and back. So if you wanted to hold the camera absolutely level, you could use this and use the feedback to put your camera absolutely level. That's important when you're taking the picture because you end up with horizon in photos like this level and not have to worry about fixing it in your image editor. The latest wrinkle I just found in the new Canon R7 mirrorless camera. It has a feature that will correct for tilt automatically. You turn it on and maybe it looked like this, it'll adjust it, and so that it's like that. And it uses the accelerometer built into the camera to measure how much the camera's tilted for image stabilization, and it uses it to determine when the camera's level. Now, it's not a cropped image. You can do electronic correction where they tilt and then they crop the image. In this case, it actually tilts the sensor enough to level it out. So you can still get the full image frame, but you get a level picture without having to do anything. And I just discovered this last week. It's a very, very useful feature if you do a lot of landscape photography. Now, when it comes with exposure, DSLRs, for a while there, some of the early ones, they would have like 3 exposure sensors. Then they went to like 9. And then you get finally, in the last generation of DSLRs, you could have as many as 61 exposure and focus sensors. But they're all centered in the center of the screen, which means if your subject happens to be in the center of the screen, they work pretty well, but as this guy is flying this way, you couldn't focus on it until he gets here. 61 really isn't enough exposure and autofocus sensors to cover the full frame. Some mirrorless cameras have 5,000 autofocus points that are user selectable, and 700 or 800 actual autofocus pixels, covering virtually the whole frame. So you don't have to worry. Anywhere, anything in the frame will be in focus, and that's with phase detect autofocus. They can also measure exposure of the entire sensor anywhere they want. No problem. If you're using autofocus, you frequently want to set the focus point somewhere other than in the center of the frame. You can always set it in the center and hold down the, lock the focus and then reframe so that what was in the center before is now in focus, even though it's in a corner. With mirrorless cameras, you can not only move it around, but you can set a different orientation, a different set of focus point or focus area for different orientations. You can have it here or there or this way. You can have a different one for whichever way you turn the camera. So if you're shooting a basketball game and you're shooting vertical, well, you might want it to be focus point to be up at the top near the basket. If you're shooting horizontal, you may want it to be over at the left or the right where you got players coming in, driving towards the basket. You can do that with mirrorless cameras that you couldn't do it before. A nice innovation that the Nikon Z9 has is you can define an exact area where you want the focus to stay. Say you're shooting some hurdlers, you can tell it to only focus right here and it'll ignore everything else, which is great, especially if you're using trap focus. You can set it for, you can preset it for this portion of the hurdles, and then when they get there, it'll focus on them, and it'll take, if you're using trap focus, it'll take the picture right then, and anything that's down here will be totally ignored. Another big innovation with the mirrorless cameras is tracking. DSLRs have had tracking for many years, but with all the many thousands or hundreds of autofocus pixels on a mirrorless camera, it can be a lot more precise. You can track, can find and track eyes. So you can set the camera to look for birds or people or something else, and when it finds them, it'll track them and follow them, keep them in focus. This is Sony's options, this is Nikon's, and this is Canon's. You can tell it whether to look for humans, animals, birds, all three, or Nikon and Canon let you look for vehicles. Although when they're looking for vehicles, they're looking for motorsports vehicles. So they may not find your family SUV, but if you're shooting drag racers or NASCAR or something, it'll identify those. It'll find motorcycles, but not bicycles. I guess it wouldn't be so good for Tour de France, but pretty good for motorcycle or motocross, things like that. With Canon, when you turn it to off, that doesn't turn off subject detection. It just means it doesn't care whether it's people, animals, or vehicles. It'll look for anything. With Nikon, you turn it off, and it makes the focus a little bit faster. Nikon also has an auto mode where it'll look for anything. iFocus, it'll show you all the faces in a picture, and you can change faces, and you can decide whether it's left eye or right eye or which eye. If you've got a profile, you want the person's, or three-quarters shot, you want the person's closest eye to the camera to be in focus, so you just specify that, and that's what it will autofocus on. Of course, in the studio, you'd probably be focusing manually anyway, but shooting candid shots, you can get things that are focused as well as if you were in the studio and shooting manually. This is a great feature for wedding photographers and people who shoot their family gatherings. You can register faces and give them a priority. So if you're a wedding photographer, you can take pictures of the bride and groom and the bridal party and put the bride first and the groom second and the mother, the bride, father, the bride, and just rank them down. So when you're shooting group shots, candidates anyway, it'll search out the most important people and focus on them. And as before, you can always, they'll have the little squares around the other faces. You can switch to somebody else if you want to, but it saves a lot of time looking for the people that you really want to photograph the most. Manual focus is still a valuable tool, and if you've ever used a film SLR, you probably remember the big, huge, bright SLR focusing screens, because they were made for manual focus, because at least when I started, we didn't have autofocus. When they started doing digital cameras, the focusing screens got smaller and not quite as bright. Well, with mirrorless cameras, they have something called focus peaking, where it will look for edges and it'll highlight them in a color so that you'll know exactly what's in focus and when. So as you could focus in and out, you'll know when the edges, the petals of the flower are in focus. That can make your manual focus more accurate and faster. Magnified view is something you couldn't do with a DSLR unless you had live view. You can you get ready to take a picture, you can zoom in and focus exactly where you want before you take the picture. Another innovation is I remember going to shoot the Verb ballets, and I would set my D4S for 10 frames per second. And I would be shooting, and everybody, the other photographers said, well, Dave's here, because they could hear the thing going off like a machine gun, and it was only 10 frames per second. Usually 10 frames per second is enough, but for some things it's not. With mirrorless cameras, it doesn't have to be noisy. You can do it silently, and you can shoot up to 120 frames per second. If you're shooting baseball and you want to shoot a batter and you want to have this ball hitting the bat, you have to keep in mind that if you're shooting at 5 frames per second, the ball will move something like 15 to 18 feet between frames. So when I'd go to a baseball game and try to get that shot of the ball hitting the bat, even if it was just a foul ball, I would have to shoot 30, 40, 50 batters before I'd ever get one that was even close. Now at 120 frames per second, you could just go ahead and fire them off, and then you can get whichever one you want. These are just a few. I took like every 5th frame and put it on here. It makes it a lot, well, easier in one sense, as you can get more things captured. The other thing is you got 120 frames to go through to find your one. That's not fun, but you only have to do it once for any set. This is Jake Shima Bukuro. He's the Jimmy Page is the ukulele. I went to shoot him, and this is again with my Nikon D4S, and it was an acoustic concert, and so I didn't shoot 10 frames per second. I would just shoot like a couple frames per second, and I try to wait for the noisiest parts of the concert, but still you could hear it. And I had a photo pass, and I was perfectly permitted to do that. Didn't bother Jake, but I had one of the other patrons at the concert come up to me, and he said, just because you're allowed to shoot pictures doesn't mean you should. And I realized that it was bothering other people. So I'm now when I go to acoustic concerts, I shoot silently, and they don't even know I'm taking a picture. I turn the review off so that the LCD doesn't come on at the back of the camera and bother people, and I haven't bothered anybody since. This is an amazing new feature. The new Canon R7 and the Nikon Z9 let you take a picture up to a second before you took the picture. What it actually does is when you hold the shutter release down halfway, it starts capturing images. It doesn't save them anywhere, it just goes in the buffer. Now the buffer is large enough, even if you're shooting 30 frames a second, it can capture all 30 frames for the second. So if you're watching a football game and this happens, but you don't press the shutter release until here, and what you'd really want was this, well, that's fine, it's in there. You just go back and you can select that picture, even though you didn't press the shutter release until there. So there's untold possibilities for that. Your wedding photographer and the bride throws the bouquet, and you just miss getting the exact shot of somebody catching it. Well, you just go back a second and you select which of the 30 frames you shot, and you got it. That was pretty amazing to me.
Is that with a half press?
Yeah, with a half press. It just, as long as you're holding it down halfway, it's just capturing. It's not saving them to the memory card until you press all the way. Then it saves them to the memory card, plus the frame, the 29 frames before that. A lot has become possible because they've changed the way sensors work. The way sensors used to work, oops, there we go, center button, all right, are like this. A normal sensor has, at least with a CMOS sensor, it has has all the electronics on the front of the sensor, and then there's a well, a deep well where the light has to fall down into after passing through the red, green, and blue filters to be captured. All cameras use micro lenses to focus it, so that the light's coming in from various angles is focused, into that well. That's a problem you run into with lenses that were developed before they had digital cameras. The film camera lenses, it didn't really matter because the light was captured by tabular grains on the film, and the angle wasn't as critical. It became critical when they had digital sensors. And so that's when they had to do the micro lenses. So you'll find that lenses that were developed after digital cameras became available work better. You can get 30-year-old Canon lenses that work fine on a 5D Mark IV, but they won't work as well as newer lenses because they weren't designed to focus the light into that narrow well. Well, with the backside illuminated lenses, they reverse it. The circuitry goes here, and instead of aluminum circuitry, it's copper. So right away, it's a lot faster in moving the processing thing. And it's all down here, which leaves the full surface of the photodiode available to capture light. You can see, you compare the size of that with the size of that, it's probably 3 or 4 times as large. So you could have a 24 megapixel sensor here and a 24 megapixel sensor here, both the same resolution, but this one can capture 3 or 4 times as much light. So once they started doing this in mirrorless cameras, you started having higher ISO ratings, better results at lower ISO ratings. One thing that they applied it to the most is increasing the resolution. Sony's got a 60 megapixel full frame camera. Nikon has 50, Canon has 50 megapixels, and a lot of megapixels, you don't really need them to make a print, but it's certainly useful when you're cropping, because I don't know where I was, 50 yards, 100 yards away from this little guy down at the Venice Rookery in Florida, and shot this with a 500 millimeter lens, but I was able to crop in and get that picture as if I was closer than the mother would want me to be. Same deal here. This guy was on a tree. This isn't even the full frame. It was like out to here. He was on the tree, and I was able to crop and get that much detail. Here's a spoonbill, same deal. But if 60 megapixels isn't enough, you can get 240 megapixels of resolution with the same camera without spending $30,000 for a Hasselblad with a 100 megapixel sensor. What they do is they do what they call pixel shift, where here's the sensor, and they take 4 pictures, and they move the sensor 4 different times, half a pixel at a time. So they end up with, they do it 4 times, they end up with 16 images, and instead of a 60 megapixel image, you've got effectively a 240 megapixel image. Only drawback is you generally have to do that with a tripod-based shot, because the camera can't move between the 4 pictures. They're working on that. If they can get them to work faster, if they could get it to take all 16 shots in like a 30th of a second, it would be feasible to do it handheld. But you would do something like this and be able to blow that up. And that's 240 megapixels of information. Panoramas. A lot of us have taken panorama pictures with digital SLRs. You put your camera on a tripod, and they call it a pan head for a reason, and you rotate the camera and take a number of shots, and then you stitch them together in Photoshop. The only problem with that is, well, ideally, the tripod head should be under the optical center of the lens, not the tripod socket. If it's under the tripod socket, you get a little bit of distortion. That's that's a lot of trouble. Now Sony started it. With, I don't know if they started it, but they had a lot of their early cameras offered a panorama feature, just like everybody in this room could do now with your phones. But to do it with a camera at higher resolution, you had to swivel and take the picture. This one was taken with the camera held horizontally. This one was taken with the same camera held vertically, but still panning this way, so you get a taller panorama image. The Canon R7 has that feature, and you set it up, and then you hold down the button, and you just move the camera in the direction following the arrow, and when you're done, it stitches them together. No Photoshop needed, no stitching. It's automatic. I shoot a lot of product photography, particularly when I'm shooting pictures of cameras for illustration, and I end up, because I want the whole entire camera to be sharp, I shoot at f/36. Now the problem with f/36 is you lose a lot of sharpness due to diffraction. And you get diffraction at small f-stops. And I find the easiest way to explain what diffraction is to think of 2 docks sticking out into a lake. And when they're widely spaced apart, as if it were a wide f-stop. When the light waves come in and then they hit the edges of the docks, they diffract and they cause interference like that. Well, you've lost some detail. Now, when the f-stop is smaller, and the docks are closer together, the interference patterns are a lot worse. So, even though I'm shooting at f/36, my pictures are not as sharp as they could be if it weren't for diffraction. Well, mirrorless cameras eliminate that with a technique called in-camera focus stacking. Focus stacking itself has been around for a long time. There's applications like Helicon Focus and so forth that you can use where you just set the camera up on a tripod and you take pictures and you just move the focus ring a teeny bit between pictures, and you keep doing that until you've gone from having the front of the image to the back of the image all in sharp focus. There's several problems with that. First of all, it takes a lot of time. And second, cameras, lenses generally aren't linear when it comes to focus. When you focus a certain amount, at some distances it's a large jump in focus, and in others it's a small jump. So it's hard to get exact increments. But within camera focus stacking, the camera does it, and it'll do it, and it'll calculate and take anywhere from 30 to 300 pictures, and then you can just stack them together in Photoshop, and you get something that was shot at your lens's best aperture, which might be f8 instead of f36. You shoot it at f8, and everything is as sharp as it was shot at f8, but it's all in focus. I discovered something else that you're not going to see, I don't think you've ever seen before. It's in a couple slides. With the focus stacking, you can take all the images that you got, say you've got 300 images, and you can choose which ones to use. So you can choose so that the front objects are in focus, and there's the back object. Or you can just say, well, I'm not going to use the shots of the back object. So here we have only the front objects in focus, but the back object is out of focus. You can choose exactly where your plane of focus is. Now, you've never seen this before. In this one, the front object is in sharp focus, these two are out of focus, and the back one is in sharp focus. You can't do that with a tilt shift lens, really, but you can do it by just choosing which of your, I discovered this one when I was doing this picture, and I thought, oh gee, I can make this one be out of focus and the rest sharp. And I thought, well, what if I did, if I did this? And I thought, oh, that's evil. But it's something you can do. I'm not sure if it has any actual, it might have some creative applications. I don't know, I haven't really tried that. This picture is pretty useless. It's a good illustration of what you can do with it. What's that?
You have to stack several pictures to end up with this?
There were 300 pictures shot, and I chose which ones I used. I used the pictures in which this was in focus, and this was in focus. I didn't choose the ones where this was in focus, and I chose the ones where this was in focus. So, and then I stacked and I merged them all.
Are you doing this in Photoshop?
What? You're doing the merging in Photoshop. You shoot the 300 pictures with the camera, then you take it in Photoshop, and there's a Photoshop merge command, and it merges them. But you select which of the images you want to use, so you have control over that. And then when you're done, you take the ones that remain, and you merge them together, and you get your final shot. The only problem is if you're shooting 50 megapixel pictures and you have 300 shots and you've got them all in one file, you've got probably like a terabyte file, and you find you won't be able to save it because your hard disk won't, some operating systems won't save anything over 4 gigabytes in terms of one file size, and even if they do. Yes?
So you're talking about taking 300 pictures, frames at a time, and 600 here. So how does this affect your shutter count compared to a conventional DSLR? You see what I'm saying?
That's another topic, because with mirrorless cameras, shutter count may or may not be irrelevant. Actuations may be a more accurate term. I got a Nikon Z9 here where the shutter count is 0 because it doesn't have a shutter. And if you're using the electronic shutter to do a set like this, you take 300 pictures and you haven't used the shutter once. So the shutter count doesn't change at all.
So, okay, I don't mean to hold up your, I understand what you're saying. Go ahead.
Yeah, all right, well, we do these things so that people can ask questions anyway. Normally when we do this and we don't have 80 people in the room, there's questions all through my presentation. We can do some after this or whatever, but questions are always welcome when I'm doing these things. Another phenomenon called focus breathing. This picture was taken with a Nikon 70 to 200 millimeter f2.8 zoom, the first one that came out back in ages ago, before there were even digital cameras, which was film camera age. This was taken with the same Nikon, not the same Nikon lens, but a later version of the Nikon lens, the VR2 version. And it had something called focus breathing. What it does is, if you focus at the closest distance, at the longest focal length, the image magnification is less. And if somebody owns that lens and they shoot at 200 millimeters and 6 or 8 feet away, they're actually shooting with a 135 millimeter lens, and you get this effect. Lens designers are aware of that, and this is the worst case example, most newer lenses don't exhibit that much focus breathing. But the latest mirrorless cameras can correct for that, so that you get the same magnification at every focal length, at every focusing distance, same equivalent, and you don't have to worry about that, which I still have my original lens, and you couldn't trade me for the newer one, you know, even up or give me $1,000 extra, because I don't want to have a 200 millimeter lens that only gives you 135 millimeters worth of magnification. Mirrorless cameras have something called a zebra effect. It's like blinkies on steroids. This is not a new effect. They've had this, well, an indication of how old this feature is it measures in increments called IREs, which stands for International Radio Engineers. When they came out with the first video cameras in the 50s, they instituted the zebra effect to show them what was overexposed. Now the reason this is better than blinkies is you can set the threshold for this. You can set it anywhere from like 70% to 105%. So you can, if you're shooting a person with light skin, you can say, oh, if it gets over 85%, I want to know that it's overexposed. If you're shooting with a person with darker skin, you can set it to let you know that that person is overexposed. You can customize it. And people are still getting used to it. They're not sure what to use it for, other than it makes a nice zebra effect. But it's really a very good creative tool if you want to control your exposure carefully. Another thing that mirrorless cameras have done is allow them to design better lenses. With DSLRs, the distance between the lens flange and the sensor, the registration distance, is quite a lot. 40, 50 millimeters, which means they have to, since the rear element of the lens can get no closer to the sensor than that distance, they have to do some gymnastics to designing their lens. It limits how wide the lens can be, whether f1.2 lens or 0.95 lens. Makes it hard. They can still do them, but it makes it much more difficult to design. With the mirrorless lenses, the registration distance may be 16 millimeters, 18 millimeters, 20 millimeters with Canon. That means they're able to design lenses that are a lot better. So you buy Nikon's 50 millimeter f1.8 lens, it's not very expensive. It's likely to be the sharpest lens you've ever owned if you've had only DSLR lenses, because it's an f1.8 lens and it's super sharp. I use mine for as a macro lens. Get automatic extension tubes, and you've got a good macro lens. The other thing they did is they made the flange wider. On the DSLRs, Canon's is pretty wide. Nikon's was invented back. See, because Canon started doing when they went they abandoned the old Canon FD format to the EOS, they did a wide flange, but Nikon's was designed in like 1959. It was very narrow, and they've kept it, you know, all these years. But when they went to mirrorless cameras, they made it wide, which again lets them design lenses so that the angle of incidence comes in and the lenses are sharp. So if you take like a 70-200 millimeter lens for your Canon DSLR or Nikon DSLR, and then the same lens for their mirrorless camera, the mirrorless lens will be much sharper and even wide open. Yeah?
What's the primary function of the adapter to take a DSLR lens and be able to use it with mirrorless?
Yeah, that's the next thing. Right here. The adapters, when Nikon, even Sony, when they came out with the mirrorless cameras, they didn't have a lot of lenses designed for the mirrorless camera. So they came out with an adapter. Each Sony, Nikon, and Canon all came out with adapters that lets you use your regular DSLR lenses on your mirrorless camera. The reason for that is that short registration distance. You have 20 millimeters, 16, 18 millimeters for a lens that's designed for a 40 millimeter distance. So you put an adapter in there to take up the additional space, have some electronics that connects the lens electronics for autofocus and aperture, and you put it in the camera and you design your camera to interpret that, and presto, you've got this right here is a 25 or 30-year-old Minolta lens mounted on a brand new Sony camera, and it works just as well as it did on an old Minolta film camera back ages ago. It doesn't focus exactly as fast, but it lets you use all your existing lenses. Nikon and some of the others have a feature where you can buy neutral density filters and put them in the adapter, so you don't have to put it in front of the lens, which is handy if you have a wide angle lens that either doesn't accept filters or causes vignetting when you have a filter on there. This is one of my favorite lenses for my Nikon D4S. It's a 105 millimeter f1.4. When I got it, it was the most I ever paid for a lens, and I swore I'd never pay over $2,000 for a lens again, which lasted for a while. But even if they came out for one for the Nikon mirrorless, I probably wouldn't spend that much for this, because it's 105 f1.4. It's sort of a specialized lens. Use it for portraiture where you need selective focus. So I use it with an adapter on the Nikon Z7 II or the Z9. Video features. Some of the cameras have 8K video. Now what the 8K video, people were just getting in, people started to get 4K televisions, but 8K is on the way. But one thing 8K video does for you is you can shoot a video, and then if you want to extract a frame, you can get a frame that's virtually as sharp as a full frame still image. Just take any frame you want, and it'll be 15, 16 megapixels, and do that. You can shoot some of them, you can shoot video and still finally simultaneously. They can all shoot slow motion or quick motion. HDR, we're getting HDR TVs, you can shoot HDR video. And if you're a professional videographer, you'll know what log video is. That's where you shoot the video at very low visual contrast, but when you're grading it, you can extend the contrast and end up with a very long dynamic range. V-logging is a big thing now. You can use some DSLRs for V-logging. They're not the best. You have to use them in live view, and some of them tend to overheat. But now the mirrorless cameras are just made for that. Sony and Canon and Nikon have come out with cameras, and they don't even have electronic viewfinders, they're only for vlogging. Wi-Fi connectivity, you can set your camera so that, I do this with my drone, and I'll take pictures, and it'll upload to my phone. Even if the drone is turned off, or the camera's turned off, or my phone is turned off, it'll upload my pictures, so when I get home, all my pictures are on my phone to look at if I want to. You can also do it so that if you're an event photographer, it'll upload them from your camera to your laptop, so your assistant can sell pictures as you shoot. Wedding photographers can do it. Makes an extra backup. Weddings are what I stopped shooting weddings specifically because the stakes are so high. I didn't want to ever say, can we do this ceremony again? I never wanted to do that. So Jack probably remembers the president, and Chris too also here. There's done a lot of wedding. USB power. You used to have to buy a couple $100 accessory to plug your camera in to let it run off of AC power for, say, time-lapse photography or just anything where you rent it. Now you can plug the camera into a USB-C power source. It'll recharge the battery, it'll power the camera. You can shoot it for days and days without having to worry about the battery going dead. Last part, you may be wondering at this point, what are your choices if you're still with a DSLR and you've been thinking of switching? Basically, your choices right now are Sony, Nikon, Canon, Olympus, Panasonic, Fuji, and if you have a lot of money, Leica. And in a medium format, and you have even more money, up to some of these costs up to $30,000. You can get some very nice mirrorless cameras. I last gave this presentation, I think, back in April or May, and it's already out of date. But with Sony, you've got, at the high end, you've got the Sony Alpha A1 and the A7 IV is the consumer priced one. Nikon's got the Z9, and Z6 II is an example I use for one that just about anybody can afford. Canon's got the R3, they're going to be coming out with an R1. I don't know what that's going to cost. R6 is a full frame camera. The R7 that I brought with me tonight is an APS-C camera, both priced, well, with the lens about the same. Fuji has some medium format cameras that can cost up to $10,000, and they've got APS-C. This is already out of date. They've got a new H model that they've just introduced. And then Olympus has a professional camera, and Lumix also has. Lumix is especially good for movies. Leica, you can pay, I don't remember whether it's $7,000 for the body alone, but I know you can expect to pay $5,000 for every Leica lens that you get. And that's it. This is where I answer questions, and usually when we have these, when you come to the SIG meetings, it'll be your opportunity a lot of times to look at the latest and greatest equipment. This is the Canon R7 that just came out a few weeks ago. This is
What's the price of that?
what's that?
What's the price of the R7?
Well, this is the R10. The R7 I just sent off somebody. The R7 is $1,500 for the body, and this is the R10, which is like less than $1,000. Then I brought the flagship Sony, the A1. This was the best camera in the world for a couple months. And it cost like $6,500. And it just had I took it to Florida and I was shooting birds like crazy because it would just autofocus everything in sight. And then this came along, the Nikon Z9, and a lot of the features in it are better than the Sony, and it was only $5,500, $1,000 less and more of a camera. And this is the one that'll take the picture 1 second before you press the shutter release, and a lot of the other things. I swore I would never stop using my D4S, but once I got to 7200 for this and discovered it was sharper than the sharpest lens I own, I've started using, I'm going, what's today, Saturday, going to a concert, Al Di Meola tomorrow, and I'll be using this camera to shoot that. So if anybody has any questions, we answer them during this
Yeah,
period.
let me bring the mic so they could hear it home.
Dave, I was just wondering, I had the Z9 and I use my old lenses with it. Would it make a big difference to buy I hadn't bought the new lenses?
You can use your old lenses with it, and they'll be just as good as they were before. And if you don't need better in terms of sharpness, which you probably don't, I mean, my 70-200 for my D4S was like so sharp, I couldn't believe it. I thought, I'm never going to sell this lens. And then I got the new one, and it's better. But you can use it, you just get the adapter. It's like $250 for the adapter, and then you can put any AFS or AFI lens on it. It won't do the AFD because it has to have an autofocus motor built into the lens rather than using the motor on the camera because the adapter doesn't have a motor. And so you can use any lens and get just as good a results as you had before. You don't gain the weight advantages. You've been carrying those lenses around for years and liked it, so.
Okay, all right, well, appreciate that. Thank you.
Dave, along that line, one question. Will the FTZ adapter, any of these adapters, slow the autofocus at all?
They're not supposed to, but the one reason I got the Z-mount 70-200 is because that was probably my most used lens, and I did notice it focused a little bit slower, and I couldn't do that. I was using it for like 80% of what I shot, sports, wildlife, concerts, things like that. So I had to go and, well, I guess I am going to spend more than $2,000 for it, and I got it. So, yeah.
So along those same lines on the adapters, is there any features inside the camera that are typically not available when you're using the older lenses when you have to use the adapter on that?
No, if the older lens had vibration reduction, you'll still get it. And in fact, the camera will trade off and use the in-body stabilization for rotational and X and Y movement, but it'll switch and use the lenses image stabilization for pitch and yaw because it's like a lever, long lens. It goes up and down, left and right, a lot more than a sensor can go left and right. So all the features will be available, image stabilization, autofocus.
That is interesting to hear because several articles I've read said with the old lenses with the adapter, which have the image stabilization in the lens, like the 70-200,
Yeah.
that you wouldn't get the full benefit of the in-body with it. You're saying you would get all four?
They're confused.
I'm glad to hear.
You get the full benefit of the in-body to the extent that the camera is smart enough to know when the lens is better than the in-body. So yeah, when you have a lens with image stabilization, you don't use the in-body, but that's because the lens is better. So I don't know why they say.
The lens is better even though it's not doing it it's only doing it in two directions.
It's doing it in it's doing it in the two directions that it does best. And it does it better than the in-body in those directions. When you tilt it, if you've got something on a sensor and you're tilting it that much, it's a very small movement on the sensor, but it's a very large movement on the lens.
So the pitch and the yaw that you would get from the in-body, you're still getting that? Or
No, it
it's-
ignores that because it's not as good.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Dave, I've got a Canon R5 and there's a couple questions on focus bracketing for it. You recommend setting to JPEG doing the series? Is that just to hold down the file size?
Yeah. I don't think you can even use, you might be able to use RAW, but you wouldn't want to do that. You'd want to use the JPEG to keep the file. Like I said, you're gonna end up with sometimes terabyte files, and the RAW files are like 2 or 3 times bigger than that. And you know, unless you were just shooting like only 30 shots, but with a JPEG, you can shoot as many as you want. You can shoot, I've never shot 300, which is the upper limit for some cameras, but I've shot 100. And then, you know, for the illustration, I had 100 to choose from, and I could just individually see where the focus was and choose, well, these 10 are on this object and so forth, so.
And I'm also using a Fuji X Pro 3, and in their system for focus bracketing, they allow you to set the near and far distance so you don't have extraneous background.
Yeah, all of them let you do that.
Can we expect that? I don't see that the R5 allows me to do that. Can we expect that at some point from them?
Yeah, you should be able to start, you should be able to manually focus on the closest point, and it should start from there, and then it'll go until it's totally out of focus. But it's,
Well, it's
digital film's free. I mean, if you shoot 100 pictures that you don't need, it just takes a little extra. You're not going to want to sit there while it takes 300 pictures anyway. So,
but it does it very quickly. Does it stop at the far point when it detects it's going out past infinity, or am I going to get 100 pictures of infinity beyond
it'll stop when it gets to the end of the focus.
Thank you.
One other quick question that I'll hand it off. On Nikon, I want to have the other cameras do this. If you're using eye detection on the Z7, let's say, and you have it on eye detection autofocus, and you're taking a picture, and then there's another picture there, but it's of an object. There's no eye. What Nikon makes you do then is, it's nothing to focus on. It defaults to nothing. You have to go into the menu and change that. You found any way around that, or is that just, I understand other cameras will default to, if there's no eye, a single spot autofocus.
What you really need to do is just define a key to turn it on and off. You go and you choose a function key, and then you go in and assign it to.
Right, and when you assign the function key, it doesn't, when you press the function key, it doesn't switch it to spot. It lets you then switch a dial, the front dial to do it. So you're basically, if you're shifting over, you have to press the function key, switch the dial to do it, and back. So that's really the only way.
It's never easy. Canon, you press when you select it, you just press the info button, and it toggles it on and off, which is nice.
Yeah, I just have a comment on focus bracketing. I got the R7, and I tried it on 0. And I set them up for 30 frames per second or 130 shot, and it did no problem. You know, you check the first point, you know, the closest one, and it went all the way. And I did not see the background being in focus. It somehow stopped whatever I wanted to be in focus, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want it to go all the way, but
Yeah.
or maybe it's because I needed more shot to get them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in C-RAW, I don't see no problem. I don't see no huge file problem.
C-RAW is smaller, so
Yeah,
that would
yeah.
work.
Any other questions?
Comment about focus stacking. There's in-camera focus stacking, and my experience has been you get a very classical looking image. It's not perfect.
You're looking at me?
No, taste. Everybody has their own taste.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No?
No.
With mirrorless cameras? Okay, are we going to be doing our first SIG then next month?
Yeah.
Okay. The first SIG, we'll have it on the calendar. We will have what topic it's going to be when that's decided, and we'll be publicizing it.
I have a comment for Susan. I find the Z 70 to 200 sharper than the F mount 70 to 200.
Do you?
Yeah. It's incredible.
Certainly have come a long way. Yes, here's another question.
Yeah. Can you mount a telescope that's like 500?
That's why I pay all the money.
Can you mount that on there and manage the focus? Is it too slow? I'm inquiring about whether you can mount a telescopic lens from DSLR 200 500 onto a Nikon Z6 II with the adapter. And I have some trouble with the focus. Is it because it's too slow?
I've got that one, it's an F5.6, and so it focuses a little slower, especially for, when, outdoors on dim days and things. For the 200, 500, you're not gonna use it outdoors anyway, but you have a really big house. So, it'll focus a little bit slower.
Because then, when I focus on then, while I'm doing birding, and you find that you're thinking of the bird, then it's out of focus for you.
I've got that lens, and I took it down to Florida, and I did, of course, this was on a Z7 II, and it was a little bit too slow. That's why I ended up getting the Nikon Z100 to 400, which was the next lens over $2,000.
That's why I was asking that question about for the big telephoto side of the 500 on the Z7 is with the FTZ adapter and in low light conditions. I'm not inside, but on cloudy days there too. It does take a noticeably longer time because of the lower light and I think the FTZ to focus, to autofocus, and that's just as to whether the Z lens would be faster. It takes away that distance. Don't know.
So, this is going to be a very basic question, but somebody that's going to jump into the mirrorless camera market. So I'm a Nikon person, right? And you go talk to the people at the store and they say, the Z5's not be fine, blah, 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 blah. So my question is, when you jump into the market, what should you take into account so you don't, because they're not cheap. So what should you take into account to make sure you're not looking for another camera a year down the road? Because, you understand what I'm saying? When you jump into the market, what should you be looking for so you don't sell yourself short? Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
It's hopefully, or you feel it's going to last for a couple of years. Or is that a dumb question? I don't know.
You need to have a really good idea of exactly what you want to do.
Okay.
A lot of people prefer to shoot one thing. I have to shoot everything because I need illustrations of everything. I need to make mistakes doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell people, here, don't do this. So I shoot everything from ballet, and not anymore, but I shot ballet, sports, concerts, things like the things I like to shoot the most are the concerts and sports and women. Just portraits of. We used to do a lot of model shoots around here, and I like to do that, but I have to shoot everything. But most people have a few things they want to shoot. They might want to be, maybe they're a coach and they want to shoot their soccer team, or they do wildlife photography, Coleman has always done a lot of photojournalism. He shoots lots of other things, but he likes to shoot photojournalism. So you may figure out exactly what you want to shoot, and then you think about what features you need. And sometimes you need to go to a camera store and talk to someone who is familiar with all the different cameras and can tell you exactly what the models can do. And as long as you find something that'll do what you want it to do and you can afford it, you get a little bit more than than what you need. All right, you should just remember that camera bodies come and go. You may not be able to want to or afford to be able to get one every 2 or 3 years, but you will, like as you're contemplating now, get one eventually, but you can use lenses virtually forever. I have lenses that I bought. I've got a 43 to 86 millimeter Nikon zoom lens I got in 1965. And if I ever need a really terrible unsharp lens, I have that and I can use it. It was one of only 2 zoom lenses available. I still got that. You buy lenses and you can, as long as you stick to the same platform, you can keep them forever and ever and ever. So most of your expenditures should be directed towards getting the lenses you need, getting a body that does what you need to do now that you can grow into, but don't worry about it too much because most of your investment is going to be in your lenses anyway. And if you get a Nikon Z7 II and then 5 years later want to get something else, well, that's all right. You can still keep the same lens. It's switching platforms that costs you a lot of money. That's what you want to avoid.
Dave, I'm wondering if you encountered I'm just wondering if you encountered this before, and I ran into this right away with my first mirrorless camera. I'm looking at my pictures and I see what I think is sensor dust, and I'm freaking out. And I get your favorite little magnifier out and I look at the sensor and I see no dust. But what was unique was the dust wasn't a speck, it was block. And I finally figured it out, and I looked, and on the back side of the rear element of my lens, because of the decreased flange distance and a small aperture, that was actually showing up. And it was great because I just had to use a blower and get the dirt off. But I haven't heard other people. Am I just really dirty with my equipment?
Be a really small aperture to show up.
It was down f/22, but
Yeah.
it showed up as a block. And it was on the back element of the lens, which saved me a lot of trouble when I saw it was not censored. And it would have been horrible to try to Photoshop out because, like I said, it was a blob and not a speck.
Yeah.
You guys did that?
One time. I was curious how quickly, since all these new models are coming out so quickly, how quickly are your books coming out? Because obviously I need a book like on the Canon of R7. How quickly is your book coming out?
My R7 book is already written and sent to the publisher. The problem is COVID. There's a long delay. They're going to send it to a printer in Korea, and it's going to take 3 or 4, 5 months to them to print it. Then they're going to put it on a boat in Korea. And the boat doesn't go to San Francisco, Los Angeles. It goes to New Jersey. And then it's unloaded in New Jersey, and then it goes to Ingram, which has offices in Pennsylvania and all over the United States. It would go by truck to there. Then Amazon and other bookstores will place an order. And Amazon will place an order and they'll say deliver it in 2 months. And then they get it in 2 months. This is Amazon only, maybe Barnes & Noble too, but Amazon, when they get it, they say, all right, we've got it, and we're going to put it on our website for sale. Once we get it to every single warehouse in the country, they got one in Twinsburg, they got one in, they got them in Cleveland, they got them everywhere. And that takes another month or longer. So this book that I just actually finished it today, and you won't see it until April next year. It's finished, I've already wrote it.
Wow.
And then you won't see it until April of next year. And I wrote a book on the Sony A7 IV and finished it in February. And in June, they sent me copies. They sent me a Federal Express copy from Korea, and I got it, and it looks beautiful. To me, it looked beautiful. And it's not available. It's now Amazon listed as going on sale October 22nd, and I've had my copy since June. So there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, you mentioned that you use the Z100 to 400 millimeter lens with the wildlife. Is that the best telephoto lens in your opinion for wildlife? And if so, do you use a teleconverter with that? What are the best options?
I have the Nikon Z1.4 teleconverter on back order for the last 4 months. So I will be using it with that. I can't comment on it with that lens. I've used the 1.4 on everything, even up to the 200 to 500 on the D4S and the other DSLR cameras. And it works really, the 1.4 teleconverter that I have used, you lose almost no sharpness, and only one f-stop. So my 200 to 500 f5.6 lens becomes an f8 lens, which is acceptable. And the 100, when I get the one to Z mount, 100 to 400 would be one stop slower. I'm expecting it to be just as good, but I can't say for sure because I haven't done it yet.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I just want to clarify what I was talking about, the focus stacking in the camera was processing the images into the final focus stack image, not taking out the image.
Yeah, all right.
Okay, any others?
I've seen some of these cameras with an ISO of 200,000. Is that practical?
There's cameras with a not really an ISO rating because the National Standards Organization doesn't, rules don't cover that because it's a multiplication with 3 million. And I've shot some pictures, not at 3 million, I've shot at like 200,000, and they're very grainy, very contrasty. And I used to be a newspaper photographer, and in those days, a really poor quality picture of Albert Bell's cork flying out of his bat was more valuable than a super sharp picture of John Rocker pointing into whatever. In some cases, people would rather have a picture that they couldn't shoot otherwise. But I wouldn't use. I sometimes shoot when I'm shooting concerts. I sometimes go up to 12,800, and with the cameras with my D4S and with the Sony and the Nikon, I routinely shoot at 6,400. And most concerts, I'll start out at 3,200, and you can't tell the grain and contrast is not bad at all. So the really super high ones, the camera vendors label them with an H because they want you to know that it's an extra high speed option. You're not really going to get a sort of good quality.
Any other questions?
Dave, this is more of an administrative question, not that much of a technical one. Service dates on cameras are not that long. Like I have a 5D Mark III Canon, and the end of service date for that camera, I think, is like April of next year. What do you recommend when your camera is running into the end of service date if you still plan on using it? I've never changed out the shutter yet. Are parts going to be available?
It's been a while since, unless the camera is very new, replacing the shutter is worth not going to just KEH.com and getting the same camera. Just getting a replacement, getting the exact same camera used for less than what the shutter replacement costs.
So you're better off just going and replace the camera instead of
Yeah,
getting a service. What else do you recommend on any other service and something that's coming to end of support life?
The vendors have been very user unfriendly. Nikon no longer allows, third-party repair places to order certain parts for certain cameras, and then, so that when they decide that it can't be serviced anymore, then nobody can do it, because they won't give, in the olden days, you could go to Marty Forsher in New York, and he would, actually, people would send their cameras to him. When I was a traveling photojournalist, I had 12 Nikon F bodies, and 3 to use, 3 as backup, 3 to send to Marty for cleaning, lubricating, and adjustment, and that sort of thing. In those days, we needed 3 cameras because they didn't have zoom lenses, and one would have tri-X, one would have Ektachrome, and then the other one would have tri-X with a 105 millimeter lens rather than a 30. Today, it's so much easier. Most people just carry around one camera and a zoom lens, and they can shoot most everything, or a couple zoom lenses, and shoot most everything. And so, probably a lot of people in this room don't have 2 or 3 cameras sitting around. Spares. Professionals always have at least 2 of everything. When I was doing weddings, 2 flashes, or at least 2 flashes, 2 flash cords, just 2 of everything.
Well, I was gonna keep that as a backup when I got a new camera, but I'm wondering if I can even, keep it maintained. Because I'm out in the rain and the snow and the heat and everything else.
It hasn't failed yet?
We've gotten a little dirty a few times.
Oh, all right.
You go to the air show and they run the jet truck and the fumes come blowing past you where the CPS seats are.
They tend to, there's different engineering terms, mean time between failures and so forth. It's just a mean. You can have a shutter that conks out at 200,000 actuations, or another one that'll last 500,000, another one that'll conk out at 50,000. So, it hasn't, if it still works, you may get a surprise someday, but it may work for a while yet.
Good. Any others?
All right, this is the point that in the normal ones on the Thursdays, we would break up into groups. Before COVID, the Sony people would go over into the gathering, into that room, and then we'd go over to the police room for Canon. Nikon people stayed here, and we tried to have one expert on each model for each group, and we'd sit around and talk, and I would roam around, making sure everybody behaved, and we would talk for 30 minutes or whatever it would take until everybody had their questions answered. We'll do that starting next month.
Great. Yeah, it was extremely popular. And again, I'll be having announcement slides and it'll be on the calendar. You had one other?
I have a question about the 6. I'm an oddball out. I've had some. Okay. I found this helpful, your talk tonight. But breaking up with the other manufacturers, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, well, everybody's free to leave, but we would support any group where we had enough people. When we started this out, we only had 4 or 5 Sony people, and we had like 40 Nikon people and 30 Canon people, and eventually the Sony people started to get more and more and more when the mirrorless came around, because originally the Canon people were all DSLRs, and most of the Nikon people were DSLRs. Joe was always here, and he was he'd run that part. But that was like, we haven't done this for like 2.5 years. So mirrorless cameras have just come, full blast in the last 2.5 years. And so if we can get enough people for any platform, we can have a breakout group for them as well. It's just that there needs to be, it's not because we're mean, it's because we don't have enough people. If you're the only Panasonic person, you can have arguments with yourself. Yeah. Yeah.
How valuable would these sessions be for someone like me who has an early mirrorless Panasonic Lumix G7? So it's a small camera, and it's not up to date by any means.
Well, if you didn't have any, if you had a lot of questions, you may have a problem. You could get all your friends that have Panasonic cameras to come, and like I said, if 3 or 4 people show up with the same platform, we'll accommodate them. I've got Panasonic cameras myself, an Olympus.
Yeah, I'm an Olympus shooter.
Yeah.
How will you know how many Olympus shooters out there?
Oh, first thing
To
I
know
do,
whether we should even come.
well, if the presentation doesn't interest you, but the first thing I do is I say, how many Canon users do we have? People raise their hand, like, do it right now. How many Canon users do we have? All right, a lot of Canon. How many Nikon? This of anything, whether it's DSLR or mirrorless. All right, how many Sony? All right, Sony's already needs to bring their friends. And then Panasonic, Olympus. I got an Olympus in my car right now. It's stays in my car 365 days a year. If a UFO ever lands, I'm not going to have to say, oh, I only had an iPhone. I got my Olympus. I got wide angle telephone, everything. I charge the batteries all the time to make sure. Also in my car, I carry battery chargers for every battery known to mankind. So if we're at a club field trip and your battery goes dead, talk to me because I'm probably going to charge her in the car for Olympus, Fuji. We had at one time we had 5 or 6 Fuji people. And we got together and we had a Fuji meeting. And it was really great because I was going to write a Fuji book, but Fuji's a wonderful camera. There's a group called the Fuji Fanatics online, and Fanatics is a really good word for them. But the problem I had with Fuji is it had all these wonderful features. Like if you want to set your Fuji camera so that it shoots as if you're shooting Velvia film or Ektachrome or Kodachrome, you can do that. And it does all these wonderful things. They were the first one that I'm familiar with, where all the locking buttons, you could lock all the different dials just by pressing a button in the middle and then press it up again when you want to move it. It's brilliant. They had a screw-in shutter release, so you could use a screw-in cable release. Just all these wonderful features in the Fuji. And I got a Fuji X-T2, and all the lenses, I still got it. If anybody needs a complete Fuji kit, let me know. But I couldn't figure out a simple way to explain it to people in a 300-page book. I thought I'm going to need 700 pages to tell people how to do that. And there's fewer Fuji, they're fanatics, but there's fewer of them than a lot of other camera models. So I gave up. I didn't write the book. I now have a complete 7 Fuji lenses and a Fuji X-T2 that I don't use, but it's. We had a Fuji group. It would be nice. I'd like to. I always learn things. I'd say, Chris, how do you do this? Anybody find out? So the more, tell all your friends. It's never, like I said at the beginning, there's always somebody in this room always knows something that nobody else knows. And it's not always just me talking at you. It's me getting the discussion started, and then everybody has questions. And I don't know everything. I pretend to know everything, and I do not let not knowing the answer prevent me from giving you an answer. But there's somebody here that I was walking on the beach one time, and somebody was walking, and they said, "Oh, why are the sparkles on the beach?" I said, "Oh, it's the piezoelectric effect." I didn't know. Maybe it was. I don't know. I never looked it up. But just not knowing, why did that prevent me from answering the question? So, but somebody here may know the answer. That's why I did this on a Friday night, because I want to encourage people to come and participate. And we forget. We're going to do it next first Thursday in October. At the end of the meeting, we always talk about what do you want to talk about next month. And people give me suggestions, and I figure out which one the most people want to hear about, and whether or not I can either do a presentation on it or pretend to do a presentation on it. And so for October, did anybody plan to come in October? All right. All right, what would you like to talk? We've done around November, we've done like holiday lighting, how to shoot holiday lighting. One year we did how to shoot air shows. I've got a show I do on, I've done it about 40 times on how to shoot concerts and performances. And every time I update it with new pictures, because I shoot 3 concerts a month.
That would apply to any game.
Yeah. My presentations will apply to any camera, but because I use so many different kinds of cameras, I will sometimes or often have insights on which cameras could do this and which can't. And then when we're done with the presentation or during the presentation, people can ask questions that relate to their camera. I start out with something general, but then we get as specific as possible. And during the question and answers, we get as specific as possible, because by design, we've got people here that use all the different cameras, and somebody knows that kind of thing.
Right, that comes up to this gentleman's question here, about having a camera that no one else had, is the whole first part is a talk on something that relates to any camera, and he can answer questions about the Fuji or what, all those kind of things too. It's only at the very end that we break off.
Yeah.
So there's a feature, and I don't know how to set up when you take a shot and, it starts half a second or a second earlier. Is that autofocus, everything works before you press the shutter?
Basically, when you press the shutter halfway, if you're on Canon, if you're on servo or one shot, you're focusing when you press it halfway, and then your exposure is taken. So it's capturing them with the exposure and autofocus settings you want. So when you finally press it all the way, it's getting the correct exposure and autofocus, because you were set up to,
Yeah, what we'll do now is I thank you all for coming. If there are any other questions too, you can just come on up and ask Dave.
yeah, it's still social distancing.
Okay, thank you again.